The floor is open now for question, comments, or contributions. Please, if you have one, kindly raise your hand up. I will call you to unmute yourself, ask your question, make your contribution, or make your comment. So while we are waiting for the audience to articulate theirs, okay, I can see a hand up here. From who actually? I can actually see from where the hand is. Okay, why I try to sort that out. My question goes to Mr. Wyman. I'm thinking, could you please throw more light on how slavery actually disrupts the relationship between the body and the world? Can you throw more light on that, please? Thank
Okay,
you.
yeah. Okay. And just so I'm pronouncing it correct, is Dr. Chimakonam? Is that how you pronounce it correctly?
Yes.
Okay. um, so if we again, let's return back to that same example of being in a concentration camp. And this can also be applied to the Russian Soviet prisoners in the Gulag, where their manner in which they can perceive their choices having an effect is disrupted by someone else. Slavery is something that's different because it's it's a state of bare life where they're not even viewed as biological things. So within a concentration camp, they're still viewed as persons. They're just persons outside of the state. Slavery, you're viewed as a thing or an object that is owned by someone else. So the way in which you um, can enact your agency on the world can't happen the same way as a biological thing, is because the way you perceive it is filtered through someone else's perspective. So again, using that same example of like, well, if I say I am trying to reclaim my agency and the only thing I can choose is how I die, which is normally happens in states of bare life. The only thing that you have control over in certain circumstances is the way that you die. Well, as a slave, you can't even do that. The way that autonomy is disrupted is something that I feel like is very distinct. So if I don't want to eat and I decide to die from starvation, well, I can't even choose to do that. And the way my body orients itself to the world and sees its effects can no longer be only understood through my self-relation process. So when Kierkegaard talks about the self-relation process, he talks about how, without getting too deep into it, the way in which we create meaning, the way in which we understand despair can only happen through the way we receive the information. But particularly with the agency of a slave, the way I perceive free will and the way I perceive I can use my body is not filtered through just myself. It's how someone imposes their view of me. And that's why I think, to shorten the answer to the question, that the way slavery disrupts that body relation is unlike anything else because you are treating something that should have a personhood distinction as something that is something that can be owned and be used for a means to an end. And I think that is the only particular state of bare life that allows that.
Thank you for this response. Professor Matulina, please unmute yourself, ask your question, or make your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Professor Abraham Olifire. I was fascinated by his presentation. It sounded to me, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, it sounded to me that he's inviting us to move from necropolitics to some politics of hope. And if that is the case, I'm wondering how that invitation fits with reality, particularly at the global stage, where citizens were going on about their lives and the best way they can do get vandalized or killed by other states, other nations. Now, it's not just something that happens internally, as Mbembe posits in necropolitics. Look at the war on Gaza or Palestine. Look at the war between, not even between, the bombardment of Ukraine. You look at what has happened with Iran and all those things that are happening in that region. You know, you're going about your business there and you just get bombed. News reporters are trying to report on the war and their stations get bombed. So for me, the world has become even more precarious. You can get bombed anywhere, anytime. I mean, Africa, for example, its state of security is so perilous. I always say anybody with enough bombs can come and park any ship they want off the coast of Africa and even threaten us or give us 1 or 2 missiles a day and we'll surrender our independence. So the world is becoming more precarious, more perilous to necropolitics. Uh, so I wonder what this invitation does vis-a-vis reality. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you
that's
for your question. Please, let's remember to keep our questions and responses very brief. Thank you.
I suppose I can't keep this brief at all. Let me cut it short. Now, Bernard, that's a question we should ask Mbembe. I consider I've not discussed The Brutalist, the latest book, also because I didn't see too much phenomenology. It's a lot of work to work it out of Mbembe, so I concentrate on the stuff that was obvious. Okay, but let me not avoid your question. I think Mbembe is trying to say that in the literature, at least in critical theory, the critical theory is proposing there is some hope, there is some talk that things can be different. I think this is where it's coming from. What the brutalist says, I don't know. As for the harsh realities, I think what we really need, and this is where I agree with you, is a change of mindset. Without that, I think politics will stay in the dark. And I think he's trying to push the change of mindset, at least in the literature. Um, as for the rest, it looks bleak, I know. The change of mindset would address exactly the people with power, technological and capital. That would change. In reality, can be addressed with the hope we had during the Middle Ages, which were also very dark, and how Renaissance came in with reading, a change of mindset from legitimating actions with higher authorities to just starting to think for yourself. And within 30, 40 years, the world has changed. So I think Mbembe is perhaps opting for such kind of thing. Or perhaps the critics said he's too dark in necropolitics and should move on. This is a change of tone. I think the hope is in changing our mindsets. It might take time, the time we don't have. So too much I don't have because I think we have little time. But I think in terms of that, it might be possible. Critical theory is my only hope. And this is what we're doing here, philosophers, and trying to connect with others. He has this idea of deterritorializing things by through the back doors, through small conferences. I think that may help us, but it's a very restricted hope I pick up through him. Um, I can't satisfy your question without being hilariously idealistic. If push too much hope, if you listen to the previous talk about slavery, slavery, some would say, is even more expanded than in the past. There is little hope, but I put my trust in what we're doing here, changing mindsets. I hope our students will do better. I don't see much more to do.
Thank you for your response, Prof. Dr. Abo, please unmute yourself, ask your question or make your comments. Please make it brief. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very thought-provoking 3 lectures, and I wish I could ask questions on the 3 of them, but let me, for the purpose of time, I'll ask one quick question for Mr. Wyman and then one for Dr. Oscar. Mr. Wyman, very, very passionate. You and Oscar were very passionate and in their presentations, because it's like these are things I like to write on what I believe, and I think that's what both of you have done. You believe in this thing you are writing. But Mr. Wyman, this killing of these slaves as maybe 149. Don't you think that there is even worse slavery going on now? Because I believe that the economy, the environment where we live is our external body. The way the environment, the way our society has been, our own people, not just the. Don't you think we even face more dangerous, to use one the diction coming from Professor Olivia, precarious than even the period that we are talking about? Are we not more phenomenologically exposed to greater precarious situation? Because even our external body that sustain our internal life is under threat, annexed, enslaved, as it were. And of course, for Dr. Oscar, I am very, very interested in this. Trying to remember her name, Prof from Beirut was talking about phenomenological pedagogy earlier. Now, this teaching, this challenge, the burden, that the shadow burden, what we have called shadow burden, that the people, the young children are carrying. To what extent has this been created by the current political structure? How are the teachers that are being told to care, how are they being treated? I've been asking this kind of question. My governor in Enugu State here has been building 260, what he called 260 smart schools, and each of them will cost ₦1 billion. But I've kept asking the question, after these schools are built, what welfare package do we have for those who are going to be teaching the children in those primary schools? Just primary schools, though, not secondary or university. Smart schools, primary. What's the welfare? Don't you think this inability to care, to provide care from inside by the teachers is actually coming from the external sociological treatment coming from the society and especially from the political system?
Thank you for your questions. Mr. Wyman, please respond.
I'll be quick. Like you said, I'll be brief. Dr. Joseph, I think this is a great question. And I think with Professor Oliver and Oscar who presented before me, I think they touched on some areas that I feel like our work is connected, particularly with Professor Oliver when he talked about hope. I believe that the nature of probability is connected to the belief that we can affect our outcomes. And Bernard, when you brought up the war in Gaza, I think that's a great example of how we can see that hope actually does, even if it's small, it does affect our outcome. And Dr. Joseph, I do believe that, I don't know if I would say that the body is under worse circumstances. I think they're just different circumstances. But return to what you were saying, Bernard, when I think about the effects of the lived experience of Palestinian persons, the fact that they believed that they could get help and things would be different allowed for everyone else to then jump on board to be able to do their part to help. I think about like with some of the media blackouts that happened here in the States, where we had no idea what was actually happening on the ground in Gaza, but it was because there were certain individuals that sacrificed themselves in order to get an unbiased word out, that then one person was able to do what they could, which then allowed someone else to do what they could, which then allowed for the way in which political parties in Gaza to be able to stop it. But it didn't start without one person or group of a collective believing that they could change their outcomes, even in bleak circumstances. And I know that sounds idealistic, but from a statistical standpoint, even with look at like the rule of large numbers, survival was very bleak in Gaza for Palestinians. The rate that you would actually survive those circumstances was very bleak, but belief that the outcome would be different allowed an outcome to be different. And our access to possible worlds, particularly like the possible world in Gaza, changes because of our beliefs. And that's why I think that's different than slavery. It's because their belief actually did change their outcome. With slaves, their belief and their will doesn't necessarily change their outcomes. It's a different state of bare life. And these are both, I will argue that the Palestinians are also in these states of bare life, but their access to agency is different. And that's why, again, I just think being reduced to a thing is a very distinct phenomenological experience. And I do believe hope, even in the idealistic sense, becomes the way. And going back to, I think her name is Dr. Ratova, the idea of Afrofuturism doesn't exist unless we believe that there's an outcome that is possible, where at the base level, Black persons or people who resemble Blackness get human distinctions. And there's another, and I'll make it quick. I have a problem of not being quick. There's a gentleman named Mark Fisher who talks about how understanding the past informs the future. So even if we understand or try to understand what Afrofuturism could look like, if we don't properly understand the past, if we don't properly understand the places in which African bodies were not viewed as less than, but they were viewed as power. I think about like the first dynastic Moors that would use Sudanese soldiers, particularly to inflict fear on other armies. And at that time, Bernard, you talked about the Greeks. They were some of the most powerful military forces, but you have the Almoravids who particularly use very dark Sudanese soldiers to strike fear in the eyes of other powerful people. And the Greeks refer to them as more powerful. So they had an understanding that they were too powerful. They were also powerful, but these bodies were more powerful than us. So when we understand that type of distinction that Africans had before, it informs how we view a possible future of what a human distinction could look like. But if we don't know that, then the future that we develop or try to develop could be behind. And I'll end it there. But thank you again for your question, Dr. Joseph.
Thank you for your response. Dr. Koopman, please, you can respond.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for that very important question, Dr. Joseph. I would say that, retraining teachers to care within policies or through policies or technical workshops alone, it's not a good place to start, because care is not a skill that you can teach teachers, in the conventional sense. For me, it's more of an attunement, a way of being with others. So in a society where we are stripped of caring, the first step is not to impose new techniques, but to reawaken the teacher's own embodied understanding of suffering, and so to return them to their own humanity and their own vulnerabilities. And so phenomenology offers us a way to do so by turning our gaze away from, let's say, from abstract systems and to return to the fundamentals of lived experience. And so teachers must be given these type of spaces, or we must try to create these spaces where they feel, again, protected. And so this will allow them to reflect on their own brokenness and to narrate their own stories and to encounter the stories of their learners, not as data, but as flesh and blood, as real, something tangible and concrete. And when you read the works of these great scholars, like Aoki, who's a Japanese-Canadian scholar, who draws heavily on the work of Heidegger and Husserl, and he teaches us a very fundamental concept, which is lingering on the bridge. That is a key phenomenon that stems from Aoki's work. And that lingering on the bridge is what he refers to as, a teacher has to find that space daily where he reflects, deeply about his day, or where, he questioned things, or where he sort of returned to that moment in time and space of questioning his own awakeness and disposition to the world. And so Aoki actually reminds us that we are humans. And he says, when you look at things like this notion of decolonization that we're moving towards in Africa, he says, well, even if I fail today in trying to decolonize my materials, or, to value the lived world experiences of a learner, he says, even if you fail today, teaching is a messy affair. It's a messy process. It's probably the most difficult thing to do, he argues. And so he says, if you fail today to find an answer where you confront your own convictions, come back tomorrow, come back to the bridge again, and you start the process all over until you get to that space of what he call an awakeness. And so Heidegger talks about these ways of being in the traditional sense, right, of presence at hand, and readiness to hand. On the one hand as a technical process, and on the other hand as a mechanical process in terms of, your isolation from others. And I think what we draw from there is that we need to move away from that isolationist perception or construction of the world, and see ourselves as, as dwelling humanly together with others. And so I think that's what Aoki is trying to get at. I hope I've answered your question, Dr. Joseph.
Thank you very much for your responses. Unfortunately, he cannot follow up, but the conversation can continue after this conference. So with this, we have come to the end of this session. We'll take a 3-minute break and come back for the last session of this conference. So the next session will be chaired by my colleague, Dr. Paul Michael. So we'll take a 3-minute break now and come back by 3:15. Thank you.